Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Hello, hello, and welcome back, my fellow nerds. I'm really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Melanie Mitros. Melanie wears a lot of hats in our sector. She is the Fractional Chief Operating Officer at the Nonprofit Lifecycles Institute, where she partners with foundations and consultants to build organizational capacity. She's also the founder of her own consulting firm, specializing in bringing strategic plans to life through actionable steps. Melanie has a passion for streamlining work through AI and automation, and she's all about helping leaders work smarter, not harder. In this episode, we dive into how leaders can adapt in these turbulent times, especially as funding priorities shift. Melanie even shares her insights on vulnerable leadership, team alignment, as well as the power of code switching when writing grants for marginalized communities. We also explore how nonprofits can prepare for this AI era, strengthen capacity, and even consider bold moves like mergers and strategic partnerships. But first, I want to give a shout out of immense gratitude to Bloomerang for sponsoring this season and allowing these conversations to take place. So get ready for a conversation that blends strategy, authenticity, as well as actionable takeaways, and leaves you inspired to unleash your nonprofit's full potential. All right. Well, welcome, Melanie. I am so thrilled to have you here. So for everyone listening, Melanie and I, we have met before, but this is our first time truly in like a deep, rich conversation. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for saying yes to this invitation.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to dive deep, or as I say, like nerd out over leadership and sustainability. Before we do that, though, would you share a little bit with our listeners, a little bit about yourself and your role in the sector?
Sure, happy to. So, I am the current fractional chief operating officer with the Nonprofit Lifecycles Institute. So, we work with foundations and consultants and nonprofits throughout the country on capacity building and really using a stage-based approach to help organizations identify where they are in their nonprofit life cycles and then helping them build capacity depending on where they are and what needs they have. And then I also have my own consulting firm. So I split time as a consultant, like many of us do, and like one kind of big role. And then I have a bunch of other smaller roles in my consulting side of the work. I really love strategic plan implementation. Don't like designing strategic plans, but I love the nitty gritty operationalizing, implementing, like how do you actually build the ship, not just dream up the ship, but how do you build it? So those are kind of my two spaces I really operate in. I also do a ton in systems and I've been nerding out in all of the AI, especially on the automations side of things, really being able to try to streamline like how we do our work in a way that is not always we get into doing the work, but the connecting all the puzzle pieces gets hard. So I think those are kind of my spaces I currently operate in.
And that some of that was new to me. So I appreciate you
Mm,
sharing that. Yeah. And really, grounding us in the work that you're doing.
yeah.
Nonprofit Leadership Institute, it has been, or sorry, Nonprofit Life Cycle. Again, back
Hmm.
back to words are hard, right? I've been up and working since 6 a.m. my time. But that has been a game changer for me. And being able to
Hmm.
visually represent an organization by way of
Hmm.
this life cycle chart, graph, model, whatever
Yep.
we choose to call it in that moment, has really
Hmm.
been a changer. And equally, I really appreciate your implementation passion of strategic plans, because I find, Melanie, I do strategic planning, right?
Hmm.
So many places will say, well, we never got it done, or we
Nope.
never did the last, right? It sat on this shelf, which is now really a digital shelf, and no one
Yeah.
ever gets back to it. So I love that that's part of
Oh.
your niche there.
Yeah, I love that space. Like, I'm happy to help you dream up whatever you want to dream up. But if it's not realistic and you're not ready to hit the gas and go with it, I'm not in. Like, I've actually turned down several projects because I felt like they were really just wanting a plan that wasn't going to be operationalized. And I was like, I'm not the right person.
Ooh, that's good. I love the clarity that you provide
Yeah.
there. Yeah. And that takes a bold leader. So, as I think of this, and we look at our current state of affairs, we all
Hmm.
know that we are all navigating some really turbulent times right
Hmm.
now. I'm curious how you're seeing leadership and how you're seeing sustainability. Um, what does that look like in our current landscape?
Yeah.
How are you seeing organizations navigate this?
A lot of different ways, some really well, some not really well. And I think it really depends on the market that you're in. It depends on um, which organization you're talking about. If you're talking about a small sole proprietor, maybe a couple of partners, consulting firm, it feels very, very constricting because much of the work that a lot of the nonprofits were doing, that consultants were supporting, there's been massive funding shifts that have happened, in the sense of, federal funding no longer funding in the DEI space and having to like extricate all of that language. So you have to have a leader that can recognize those changes, adapt to those changes, um, know who they are and who their organization is with enough clarity to be okay pivoting the language. That code shifting is really, really critical for leaders right now in being able to hold the context of what is true and precious to them. Like for me, it's, justice is one of those spaces that like I just have to have. And if I don't have it, then I have to step away and find something else. But I'm okay with language shifting or being a little ambiguous in how I talk about DEI. You want to take the language out? Fine. We can still talk about the data around who is the most impacted community and how do we do the work. So I think
Right.
those are pieces we're hearing a lot, whether they're nonprofits, whether they're foundations, I mean, even some of the federal and state partners that we have are having to really work on their own language and shifting their language in those spaces. But it's been a lot of hard, like folks have felt really compressed and pressured in ways that they haven't for quite a while. I would say probably at least pre-COVID, if not even like maybe 2008 to 2010 range. That's really kind of the sentiments and the echoing that I'm hearing.
I appreciate you sharing that. And, when I look back at my work, I started my
Mhm.
consulting in 2009 because of that economic crisis. And so
Mhm.
when we look at our landscape, there's been so much change, right?
Mhm.
So much change, so much to navigate.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the ambiguity as well. I was talking to someone earlier today around, we're not being inauthentic
Mhm.
when we don't mention DEI, right? But when we lean into
Right.
humanity, we lean into the language that everyone
Mhm.
has the right to whatever this is that we're providing our
Uh-huh.
community,
Uh-huh.
that speaks to a broader audience. Now, when we know that someone is leaning into that DEI space, a funder,
Hmm.
right, in particular,
Hmm.
then we absolutely lean into that language as well. So
Yeah.
there's ways and times to do that. But I think
Yep.
as leaders, we need to know how to show up, which takes me
Yep.
to style. And this is one of
Hmm.
my favorite questions I like to ask, Melanie, is about your particular leadership style. How might you
Yeah.
define it or describe it? And then a second part to that is, have you seen it change? Like, has your personal leadership style changed over your career?
I do think it has evolved. I don't know that I would say it's changed. I am a painfully transparent leader, um, which makes me really good at some things and makes me not really good at others. Uh,
I can appreciate that.
I'm emotionally transparent. I don't think there's anything wrong with if I'm really upset about something, raising my voice, shedding some tears. Like, no, I'm not hysterical. I'm emotional about it. And like, emotion is normal and important. And I think from the standpoint of myself as a leader, that has taken time for me to get comfortable with my own emotions, to get really comfortable with other people's emotions and actually like it. I enjoy it when I'm in a conversation and I can see either the excitement or the passion or the devastation, in somebody that I'm working with. I really, really enjoy that. But transparency, and I think that that emotion piece is kind of layered in with the transparency. That if I am thrilled with work that you're doing, you're going to know I'm thrilled with work that you're doing. If I think there's room for improvement, you're going to know that there's room for improvement. The three questions I got really good at asking when I was in kind of like a semi leadership position in a previous role was, I'd get assigned something like you need to go produce this report or, gather this information. Great. Like, I'm so happy to do that. Who is the intended audience? What are the outcomes that we want to have from this? What's my timeline? And like, what's the product that you want from this? So that I think the lack of clarity that I had from some kind of roles and positions and different, and it wasn't necessarily just leaders that were I was working with, but just the roles, they didn't have a lot of transparency or a lot of clarity. And so I had to create it. And so that's what I was saying. Like, I feel like it's evolved in the sense of like, I had to build clarity in the role I was in, which now I love clarity. I love transparency. Even my two teenagers are like, Dear Lord, Mom, like, we don't need to know any more information about, we just asked this one question. Please stop. I'm like, okay, I will ask the next question and I'll answer that one too. So those are my big leadership styles.
I really like those questions. And
Mhm.
I want to piggyback on that. Like,
Sure.
did you come up with these on your own, or was it that gap where you're like, gosh, I wish this supervisor, this leader, this
Uh-huh.
project manager had given me this intel, but now I have to ask these qualifying questions? Like, how did you come to these questions that you've gotten so very good at asking?
And I think it was the combination. I think I was like I had like 3 or 4 situations, like just back to back to back, like over the span of like 3 or 4 months, like really tight time frame, where I was like, I don't know what the purpose of this is. What are we trying to accomplish with this? Who's the audience? What does it need to read like? Like, is this a college graduate level reading, or does this need to be a general public third grade reading level? Like that, I just was constantly having to go back and ask questions rather than having the clarity up front. And then I had really started listening to podcasts a good bit at that point, and I'm pretty sure it was probably a combination of my um, Harvard Business Review, Adam Grant, Brene Brown, like it. it was probably peppered through. I couldn't put a finger on exactly where it came from. Um, but it has tortured my leadership. So folks that were assigning me things like that, I will very candidly say they did not love those questions. But I really
Yeah.
appreciated where it got us. Like it got us to the point where we could sit down and in 10 minutes, have a plan mapped out for a project or for whatever it needed to do. And we all had clarity, and it rarely took a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I love your shout out to Brene Brown. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan as well, really like
Too.
her. And I was
Hmm.
thinking about her when you were, and going back to the beginning of our conversation, you were sharing about your leadership style. That is
Hmm.
a very vulnerable way of leading, and
Hmm.
I honor that, and I can always
Hmm.
recognize that in someone. I feel like I bring a lot of that to my life and my work as
Hmm.
well. And
Hmm.
I just love seeing it showing up more. I
Yeah,
see it show up more and more. I hope you're also seeing it.
me
Um,
too.
yeah, it's refreshing.
Yeah, and in some spaces I see it more, in some spaces I see it less. Actually, in the physical relocation from Phoenix to Birmingham, I've seen it less here. We always joked about nonprofit nice or philanthropy nice, kind of as a global style, but there's also this other layer of regional that comes into play that you have to kind of navigate when you're in different geographies.
Absolutely. That is a
Yeah.
great call out. Talk about navigating, right? When it comes
Hmm.
to the nonprofits again, like I
Hmm.
know you're hearing this because you're directly working with
Hmm.
nonprofits, you're working with consultants that are directly working with nonprofits. There's a lot of
Hmm.
change. There's a lot,
Hmm.
in this landscape, economic, social, political landscape. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of organizations needing to adapt something. It could be their
Hmm.
budget, it could be their
Hmm.
structure, but how are you stepping in and helping these organizations adapt during this critical time? And if
Yeah.
not you, like if you don't have something top of mind that you feel comfortable sharing,
Hmm.
Melanie, similarly with these other spaces and projects that you are so
Hmm.
privy to hearing, what is coming up by way of this changing landscape?
Hmm. So there's two examples that I'll try to kind of talk through. One with a large funder, and I really have tried to challenge them to fund more, to really think strategically about understanding the gaps in their areas that they're funding, and have a really good idea around who's funding what and what the gaps are that the community need. So I actually went through like about an 18-month process of them helping kind of do a strategic landscape analysis in a couple of really finite spaces. We were able to identify what those spaces were, and then to encourage and just like help justify why they needed a long-term investment plan, and actually put that plan into practice and implement it. So it was really exciting. It leveraged from that to now it's like a 5-year, $75 million investment. So like they did really put their time and money where their mouth was in this project. So that was a great case of seeing it unfold well. The flip side, been working with some nonprofits up in New Jersey on actually helping them build skills and really pivot their grant writing to the current environment. And they are working in spaces that it is hard to start with. And then you're layering having to take all the DEI language out of it when it's women, immigrants, um, domestic violence, it's dating abuse, so the population who is being directly impacted is some of the most vulnerable populations. And those are also the same areas that funding has been just like, nope, nope, nope. Just getting carved out. So really having to put on some different hats and think through how can we help you strategically almost realign your messaging and kind of realign how you're talking about things in a way that can get through. So very much back to what we were kind of started the conversation with, that they're having to do code shifting and really saying like these are mission aligned. Like I have to hold the line on what these are, but I can flex the way I talk about these other things to make sure that it's in alignment with the funder. And so I think that's a really, really big thing. Any consultants working with nonprofits, any nonprofits that are directly applying to funding to foundations or federal government, you have to understand what their priorities are and how their language is and match it. If you don't match it, it's not going to get funded. Like, I understand you're still doing some of the most amazing work ever. It's not going to get funded. Um, so I think those are two big projects that we've really tried to help with. There's one other piece, and I don't know if it necessarily fits in here, but it probably does. It actually was one of the one of the ads on the podcast I was listening to this morning, talking about leadership, and that it's not about the content that it's about, can you adapt and can you um, be able to build your skills. And I think those are really critical pieces in the nonprofit and the consultant serving nonprofit sectors is building your skills, particularly around AI and really knowing what's out there, how to use it, how to leverage it, because it's not going away. Like it's not going
Right.
away. So we need to build our skills to be able to rapidly leverage and work with nonprofits, particularly the nonprofits that most of us are working with are not the ones that have team members who they can go send to a training and then come back and do whatever they need to do. They're leaning on a consultant to help them figure it out in a, $1,500 contract because that's all they got.
That's right. Wow, that's a lot to think about. I love all three of those examples. I think they're all extremely relevant, right? And gosh, so much. I appreciate the language in the grant space, the
Hmm.
proposals, because you're right. It does kind of, take us back to the beginning when we were talking about
Hmm.
the code shifting. And
Hmm.
that was a term, code shifting, that I recently learned. And I would say, like, in the last year or so, but
Hmm.
boy, howdy, are we having to use it? Like
Yeah.
really having to do that. And we're
Hmm.
all leaders, nonprofit staff, board members, everyone. We're trying to balance this
Hmm.
balance beam, right? And
Yep.
the beam is this operational efficiency. How do we operate in such an efficient manner,
Hmm.
because so many organizations, because of the funding cuts and the landscape, they're terrified
Hmm.
of closing doors. That's reality.
Hmm.
But also
It is.
keeping staff, right? So
Yeah.
investing in their professional team. And to me, Melanie, that means like their staff, that means their board, their
Hmm.
volunteers, likely their
Hmm.
consultancy. Like it's the whole ecosystem.
Hmm.
Um, what's the secret to this? Like, how do we balance on this beam?
Oh, so this is where my transparency can be not so wonderful. Um, some nonprofits need to close. They need to merge. They need to close. They need to really reevaluate their models, their programs, um, merge, and that's the thing that I think the nonprofit life cycles framework has really further kind of invested in me. So every organization should be working towards a life cycle. And if they're in decline, they really need to identify why they're in decline. It is not a bad thing to choose to go into terminal and sunset an organization and do it respectfully and do it well. I work on the two ends of the life cycle. I love startup and early growth. I care nothing about maturity. Don't I get bored? I check out. I don't want to be involved. I love decline and I love terminal. So really working with organizations to sunset. It is a reality that no one wants to talk about, that we have a really, really huge number of nonprofits. Not that all of their work is not needed, but their work could be done more efficiently if we think about, how do they have spaces where they merge back office, where they merge operations, where they merge finances, where they, decide to be programs under a fiscal sponsor. There's a lot of different strategies out there in that space. But I think from kind of a global perspective, it's a hard conversation that we don't want to have because it does mean people get laid off, people lose their jobs. Even when mergers happen, there's still going to be changes in staffing. And that is a reality. Like, that is a very real reality. Individual organizations, there's, like I was just talking about with AI, there's a lot of ways that automation and AI can help increase efficiencies within an organization and balancing the capacity needs of an organization. So maybe that's pulling back on programming, but it's ramping up board and management and operations to be able to really stabilize that whole table. So there's definitely strategies you can put in place for an individual organization, but you also have to look within the ecosystem that that organization is working within to see, is a better strategy for us to identify other partners and maybe look at a partnership or a collaboration or a merger, or whatever you want to call it. But that's where I stand on it.
I stand with you, truly, Melanie. And I'm going to throw out the number 3.8 million nonprofits
Mhm.
registered in the US. That's the last number I
Lovely.
saw. I know it fluctuates, up and
Yep.
down a little bit. And so many are struggling.
Hmm.
So many are struggling. And
Yep.
we don't have to, right? Like, we really don't have to. We can still serve the community. We can still meet our mission and those
Hmm.
goals in a different
Hmm.
structure, in a different
Hmm.
format. And I think
Yep.
having the willingness to just, I don't know, like, inquire about that, I think is what's so important. And now
Hmm.
I think now's the time to do it. I have so loved our conversation. I wish we were sitting, at a coffee house where we could speak forever and talk about
Agreed.
this, because I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your
Hmm.
transparency. And you deliver it in such a very calm way, right? Like, I really appreciate that about you, Melanie. And for everyone
Thank
who
you.
joined, earlier in the conversation, yes, you and I have known each other, in circles and spaces, but to really
Hmm.
have a depth of a conversation, I've
Hmm.
just really enjoyed this, and I know our listeners have too. Which leads me to, where can people find more, about you, and then also the
Yeah.
companies that you serve, particularly the Nonprofit Lifecycle Institute, but shout out to you being a strategic planning implementer, because that's
Mhm.
needed. So, all the things, where do we find more about Melanie?
So the Nonprofit Lifecycles Institute, you can find us at nonprofitlifecycles.com. Lots of great information on the website. My contact information is listed under our team. It's Melanie at nonprofitlifecycles.com. We provide training, workshops for nonprofits, workshops for consultants. We provide workshops for funders. We provide cohort models for nonprofits working with funders anywhere from 1 year to 2 years. And like I said, we're all over the country with different projects with that. And then my own personal consulting is mpwconsulting.org. So I have my contact information there as well. It's Melanie at mpwconsulting.org. Um, so that's really where the space of that implementation work is happening. And I'm kind of a couple of different hats and databases and like the good geeky spaces of how to understand data and use data and some of those. So would love to get in touch with anybody if you have any questions about the work that we're doing, especially with the Nonprofit Life Cycles Institute. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah. And I love a good geek. I always say, like, the nerd in me honors the geek in you. Like, this is fantastic. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Namaste.
That's right. But as we wrap up, I always like to end with this final question is what final takeaway or piece of advice would you want our leaders listening with today, right? Like what is that
Mhm.
final whatever you want to leave them with?
Mhm. I think it ties that me as an individual along with the nonprofit work that we do, and that's really that capacity is not a luxury, it's a requirement. And that's your own personal capacity and understanding where your capacity is and what your bumpers and guardrails are, your organization's capacity, its bumpers and guardrails, your funders that you're asking for money from, what's their capacity and their bumpers and their guardrails. So, understanding your capacity is not a luxury, it's a requirement.
And with that, I call it a wrap because I don't know how else to make it any better. That was phenomenal. Melanie, thank you. Thanks for sharing your time
You're welcome.
and phenomenal insights.
It was so good to hang out with you for a little bit. Thanks for having me.